Evening. The parents of one of the 8 victims of a van and knife attack on London Bridge and in Borough Market nearby have told an inquest the 3 men responsible were barbarians who had left them in inconsolable despair. The UK will definitely take part in the European elections on the 23rd of May, despite government hopes that a Brexit deal could have been signed off and implemented by then. A British soldier has been killed by an elephant while on operations to prevent wildlife poaching in Malawi. An inquiry has begun into how the Bosnian Serb war criminal Radovan Karadzic was able to use a phone in his cell in the Netherlands to take part in a public discussion in Montenegro. Also tonight, why restoration work on Johannes Vermeer's Girl Reading a Letter at an Open Window will reveal a very different painting. The Chief Coroner for England and Wales has opened the inquests into the deaths of the 3 women and 5 men killed during the van and knife attacks on London Bridge and Borough Market nearly 2 years ago. Mark Lucraft told the Old Bailey that lives had been torn apart in less than 10 minutes of what he called high and terrible drama. In statements to the hearing, bereaved relatives and partners have been describing the people they lost, and in some cases, their last moments together as the horror unfolded. Our correspondent Richard Lister is at the Old Bailey. His report begins with the sounds captured by those caught up in the attack in June 2017.
The attack lasted less than 10 minutes. The inquest heard today how 3 men in a rented van drove first over London Bridge, steering into pedestrians and killing 2. The van crashed, and with knives taped to their wrists, the men ran towards the bars and restaurants of Borough Market, busy with people on a warm June evening. There they killed another 5 people, including a 21-year-old Australian au pair, Sarah Zelenak, the youngest of the victims. Her parents, Mark and Julie Wallace, spoke outside the court.
She loved life. She smiled with her eyes. She only ever saw the good in everyone. She just had so much unconditional love in her heart.
It's changed the way we think, how we operate.
Oh, it's horrendous.
It's always going to leave a massive hole in our heart.
It's like having a heart attack when we found out.
It has been an emotional day. Screens in the courtroom showed images of those killed, and this opening session was a chance for the victims' families to pay tribute to them. 45-year-old Xavier Thomas was one of 3 Frenchmen killed. His partner, Christine Delcourt, was in tears as she talked about losing him. Her family described his killers as barbarians. And there were stories of heroism too. A Spaniard, Ignacio Echeverria, who was killed on Borough High Street after trying to attack the 3 assailants with his skateboard. An Australian nurse, Kirsty Bowden, who heard the attacker's van crash and rushed to what she thought was a traffic accident, where she was stabbed to death. Coroner Mark Lucraft said he hoped this 11-week process would answer the questions the families have about what happened. Key amongst those questions, how was Khurram Butt able to launch the assault with Rashid Redwan and Yusuf Zagba when he was under investigation by the security services? And why was London Bridge not better protected just 3 months after a similar attack on Westminster Bridge?
Separate inquests for the 3 assailants who were shot dead by police will follow later. The Islamic State group claimed it was behind the attack. Senior Whitehall officials say the terror threat to Britain is radically different today compared with 5 years ago, when IS declared its so-called caliphate on land captured in Iraq and Syria. Officials believe that, with the loss of that territory, IS no longer has the same ability to attract recruits. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
The perceived terrorist threat to Britain is still rated at severe. That's the 2nd highest out of 5, meaning a terrorist attack is thought to be highly likely. Counter-terrorism police and MI5 are currently handling over 700 investigations, a record number. But the threat picture has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, and there is some good news. Although far-right extremism and dissident Irish Republican activities are on the rise, Whitehall officials say that today it's harder for IS to draw recruits from Europe, as it no longer has a physical territory, which it called a caliphate, after its fighters were routed from their last stronghold at Baghouz in March. British jihadists are no longer travelling in numbers to Syria as they were 5 years ago. In Britain last year, there were fewer arrests and plot disruptions than in 2017. Yet for some, the propaganda appeal of both IS and Al-Qaeda lives on. MI5 says that 80% of the plots disrupted by Western intelligence agencies last year involved people inspired by violent jihadist ideology, yet who had no contact with its leadership out in the Middle East.
The government has conceded that the UK's participation in the European parliamentary elections can't now be avoided because of the deadlock over Brexit. The Prime Minister's de facto deputy, David Lidington, said there wasn't enough time to get a deal through Parliament before the vote in just over 2 weeks' time. Brexit talks between the government and Labour have resumed, with both sides facing pressure to make progress following their poor performance in last week's local elections. From Westminster, here's our assistant political editor, Norman Smith.
The confirmation that 3 years after the Brexit referendum, voters will have to take part in the European elections is yet another significant setback for Mrs May. And while it may have become increasingly unavoidable given the parliamentary deadlock, many at Westminster will nevertheless view the decision as yet another Brexit humiliation. It comes after repeated assurances by the Prime Minister that she was determined to avoid forcing voters to take part in the poll on May the 23rd. It also marks the second time Mrs May has had to abandon a Brexit deadline after she was forced to scrap her earlier pledge to leave the EU by March the 29th. This afternoon, her number two, the Cabinet Office Minister David Lidington, conceded the government had simply run out of time to avoid taking part in the elections.
It's regrettably not going to be possible to finish that process before the date that's legally due for the European parliamentary elections. We very much hoped that we'd be able to get our exit sorted, so those will now go ahead, but we will be redoubling our efforts and talks with MPs of all parties to try to make sure that the delay after that is as short as possible.
Mr Lidington said he hoped this would mean a deal could be finalised before MEPs had to take up their seats at the start of July. But in comments that will alarm many Brexiteers, he also suggested it may not be possible to get Brexit done and dusted until the summer recess. Government sources later said this would mean remaining in the EU until August the 1st. This latest delay comes as cross-party talks resume today, but with no indication of an early breakthrough. Indeed, ahead of the meeting, the shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, struck a cautious note.
The talks have been going on for some time, as you know, but I think the time has now come, sort of crunch time, when the government's got to decide whether it's serious about significant changes capable of actually delivering a majority in the House of Commons. And we're going to be pressing them hard on that this afternoon. Obviously, the evidence of the weekend wasn't promising, but that's what we'll be discussing this afternoon.
Meanwhile, there's renewed pressure on Mrs May's own position, with the chairman of the 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers, Sir Graham Brady, expected to urge the Prime Minister to set a date for her departure. At the same time, Tory grassroots officials today announced they'll be holding a vote of no confidence in her leadership on June the 15th. Although, if passed, the vote by the National Conservative Convention will carry no constitutional authority, it would be unprecedented and could significantly increase the pressure on Mrs May to stand down.
Today is the last day people can register to vote for the European parliamentary elections on the 23rd of May. Registration can be completed online, and you can find details at the website gov.uk. A British soldier has been trampled to death by an elephant in Malawi in southeastern Africa. The 22-year-old was part of a team helping to train park rangers to combat poaching. Kensington Palace said the Duke of Cambridge would be writing to the soldier's family to offer condolences and to underline how important his work had been. Here's our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale.
Matthew Talbot of the Coldstream Guards was on a patrol to prevent wildlife poaching on Sunday in Luande National Park in Malawi. The patrol, made up of armed British soldiers and African park rangers, was walking in tall grass up to 7 feet high when they disturbed an unseen herd of elephants. One of them charged at Guardsman Matthew Talbot. He died soon after from his injuries. No one else on the patrol was hurt. Guardsman Talbot's commanding officer paid tribute to a determined and big-hearted soldier who he said had tragically died doing great good. It was the 22-year-old's first overseas deployment. Without any current major combat operations, helping fight illegal wildlife trafficking is a relatively new mission for the British Army, and one they want to expand. Small teams of British soldiers have been visiting a number of African countries to help train local park rangers with skills such as tracking poachers, carrying out surveillance and intelligence sharing. A team of up to 30 soldiers has been working in Malawi for the past 3 years. The British Army says it's already making an impact. Until 2017, around one elephant was being killed every week and one rhino a month in Luande National Park alone. But none has been killed there in recent years. The Defence Secretary, Penny Mordaunt, said this tragic incident was a reminder of the risks soldiers face as they protect some of the world's most endangered species from those who seek to profit from the criminal slaughter of wildlife.